Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. This week, we had the pleasure of speaking to someone that we have both had difficulties trying to introduce. Arielle Ford.
That's Arielle Ford, only because she is an anomaly and she does so much. And you can't even, you just have to listen to the podcast because it was,
Yes.
She's basically was a part of almost every self-help guru, spiritual teacher, writer that started in the early 90s. She was a part of that big movement that affected my life tremendously.
Yeah, she was hard to pin down because of, the dance that she kind of performed throughout her life. It seemed like a very elegant and, kind of always on the cusp of new, exciting opportunities through the spiritual self-help network, and grew amazing businesses, had amazing stories to tell. And I really enjoyed listening to her, kind of relive some of the parts of her life.
Yeah. So enjoy this conversation. Just listen.
Enjoy.
Hey, Arielle, welcome to Turning Points podcast.
Hey, Corrine, long time no see.
I know. It's so good to see you. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
I'm happy to be here.
My friend Sean, my partner in so many things. Yes.
Nice to meet you.
So we're going to launch right into our favorite question. The Turning Points question is basically, a lot of seekers can recall a time when they first became a seeker, or when they're, what maybe they learned as a child didn't work for them. So do you have a turning point that you can remember that you became a seeker?
I was born a seeker. I really was. The thing that happened to me as a very young child was that I had memories of past lives. And I also could see other dimensions. And my biggest problem was that I was convinced that it was a mistake that I was living with the family I was living with. Wow. Somehow I got dropped off with these wacko, weirdo people. And I kept waiting for my real family to come back. And I would ask my mother, I would tell her, where's my other mother? Where's my house in the woods? And I would, describe things to her, and they would just, ignore me. And the other really strange thing that happened was we lived in the South, and my mother shopped at the Winn-Dixie. And she would take me to the Winn-Dixie with her. And I was mesmerized by the aisle with the canned goods. And I was convinced if I crawled along the floor and just hung out with the canned goods, that somehow the mothership would find me and take me back to wherever it was I originally came from. And I don't know why I thought they were in the Winn-Dixie. I thought the Winn-Dixie was like church for me. Somehow I was going to be saved in the canned goods aisle. So my life was really about trying to find my tribe. I had my beliefs and I had my knowing and my understanding, but I needed people with whom I would resonate. And that, I can tell you on the day that happened. On September 12th, 1984, I moved from Miami to Los Angeles. And that was really the start of my life. That's where I found my people, where, I wasn't weird or strange or odd. And I was vibrating at the same frequency as all the people that I was meeting. And even though I didn't have the words to what it was I was doing and knowing, I finally had found my people.
How, you said the year, but do you mind, how old were you then?
Well, I'm going to be 68 tomorrow. So if you do the math, I'm really bad at math. I don't know.
I don't know either. We'll figure that out later.
I think I was 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were an adult. You were an adult when you moved out to California.
Yes.
Anyways, okay, perfect. So while you were going through this questioning phase as a kid and looking for your tribe, what was your family life like? How did they respond to that? Were they pretty open to it? Were they a little bit casual about it, or were they like, this daughter of ours is nuts?
We didn't really talk about it.
Okay.
My mother had 3 children in under 3 years, and I was the oldest. So before I turned 3, I had a brother and a sister. So she was very busy, and she was only 19 when she had me.
Wow.
So, we didn't really talk about much. I got thrown into the role of big sister and had to change Debbie's diapers. And, it was just, if I have to come back, and I've been told I'm not coming back, but if I have to come back, I want to be an only child.
Or at least not the oldest, right?
Right. The youngest. I think from my observation, the youngest child always does the best.
Well, they have it the easiest. My wife's the youngest child, and she will deny it, but she has had a much easier life than her brother and sister.
Yeah.
So okay, so you were born and raised in Florida, Miami, or did you move around as a kid?
No, I was born in Miami and raised in Hollywood, which is, a half hour north of Miami. Gotcha. To South Florida.
Gotcha.
And so once you found your tribe in California, then what did that look like next? Because, I had mentioned to you when I reached out to you for the podcast that Hot Chocolate for the Mystical Soul was a huge, like even probably more of an impact on me than Chicken Soup for the Mystical Soul or Chicken Soup for the Soul. I didn't realize until I just looked up the book a little while ago that you were the co-author on Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Well, I was the publicist for all the Chicken Soup books in the early days.
Okay.
And Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield asked me to write a Chicken Soup book with them. And that book was going to be titled Chicken Soup for the Mystical Soul, 101 True Stories of Angels and Miracles. And when I delivered the manuscript, they called me up and they said, there are 10 stories in this book that you have to take out. And I said, which stories? And they named off the 10 best stories in the book. The absolute best stories, including my favorite story, which was by Malika Chopra about the day India ran out of milk because Ganeshas everywhere were drinking milk. And I said, why? Why do these stories have to come out? And they just said, well, they're just too woo-woo. And I said, but that's the point.
Exactly.
This is Chicken Soup for the Mystical Soul. The more woo-woo, the better. And they said, no, those stories can't go in. And they were my biggest client at the time. And I loved working with them. And I didn't, they asked me to write the book. I didn't really care about the book that much. And I just said to them, listen, let's forget about the book. Let's tear up the contract. Let's forget this ever happened. And we'll just go back to normal. And they were fine with that. And I was fine with that. But what happened was I knew a lot of literary agents because I did PR for all their clients. And this one agent said to me, hey, what's happening with your book? And I tell her this whole story. And she says to me, well, will you send me the manuscript? Sure, why not? I'm not going to do anything with it. I send her the manuscript. And 2 weeks later, she calls me up. And she said, I just got you a 6-figure advance for your book. And it has a new title. And it's called Hot Chocolate for the Mystical Soul. And I was like, no, you can't do that. That's Mark and Jack's format. The whole construct of the book is Chicken Soup. I can't do that. And she said, well, ask them. Maybe they'll be okay with it. So I get them on the phone and I just tell them the truth. And they were so amazing. And Jack Canfield says to me, that's fantastic. I'll write the foreword to the book. And Mark says, oh, wow, that's amazing. And I'll write the afterword for the book. And we're going to promote your book everywhere. Now, what I didn't know at the time was I didn't know the truth about why they wanted to take those stories out. What I will tell you is that they were so generous and the book came out and it did really well. I found out much later that the number one reader of the Chicken Soup books back in those days were evangelical Christians. And they knew that if their core audience read about Ganeshas in India drinking milk and some of the other stuff I had going on, that there would be backlash that they weren't willing to risk, which explained why they were so happy that my efforts could move on. And so to this day, I'm still friends with both of them. I still talk to them all the time. And that was the beginning of a 6-book series in the Hot Chocolate series.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I still remember reading that book in my apartment in Nashville and just sort of beginning my spiritual journey. And I resonated with it so deeply because I was always a mystical kid. And when that book came out, it's like, there's other people out there too. And
Lots of them.
yeah, so many. And so that was the idea really with the podcast too, is to kind of have, personal mystical stories is basically, I happen to call it turning points at this point in time. But it is really people's mystical points that where they see things in a different way or yeah. So thank you. That's great. Okay. So I want to know, so I don't know where the hot chocolate was in there from when you got to LA, but I want to hear more.
I got to LA in 84 and the hot chocolate thing started in 96.
Okay. So what did you do between then?
I was up to all kinds of stuff. I started my PR firm in the late 80s, and I ended up specializing in representing spiritual and self-help authors, doing all their publicity and marketing. So I had this pretty impressive client list of people who weren't famous when I met them, but we got famous together. Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dwyer, Louise Haye, Marianne Williamson, Miguel Ruiz, Neale Donald Walsch, Dean Ornish, Gary Zukav, my sister, Debbie Ford, and others whose names I can't even think of right now. So I had this niche that I pretty much owned and dominated for quite a long time because it matched my personal interests. Mm. I love making money, but I wasn't in business necessarily to make money. So I turned down a lot of authors. The only authors I took were the ones whose book I thought other people needed to read.
Yeah.
Well, the books had changed my life, therefore I would represent them. So there were some famous people I turned down whose names I'm not going to mention because I didn't resonate with their frequency or their message. Mm. And it was fun for a long time until December of 2004 when I woke up one day and decided I was done and I closed it all down.
Wow. So when you were in the early stages of having that publicity company and the marketing for this, pretty, even now it's a pretty niche. Well, I don't know how that plays into the the world global publishing genres, but at the that was a pretty small market of people weren't into the mystical seeking spiritual books.
Sort of the fun thing about it, like when I started working with Deepak, which might have been 1992 or 93. Wow. So he had 2 books out. One was self-published. Mm-hmm. And the other one had been self-published and then found a publisher. So he was sort of had in the TM world, he was sort of known, but he was not on the national stage yet. And I remember calling my contact at Newsweek one day, doing this pitch on this medical doctor who taught Ayurvedic medicine. And I said his name and the guy says to me, 6-pack who? I or what? What are you talking about? Why are you wasting my time? And it was somebody I knew really well, and I still know today. And I just said to him, I said, listen, Trent, I said, let me tell you a story. And I'm going to tell you my personal story. My stepfather is chief of staff of a major metropolitan hospital in South Florida. He went to Penn. He's an Ivy League party line AMA medical doctor. And a year ago, he was diagnosed with advanced inoperable prostate cancer with a PSA of over 4,000, and the cancer had spread throughout his entire body, and modern medicine had nothing for him. They told him, you have maybe a year to live. And he sat down with my sister and I, we called him Doc, and he told us his diagnosis and what it was. And he said, you girls are into some weird stuff. If you were me, what would you do? And Debbie said, well, I think you should read Louise Haye's book, You Can Heal Your Life, and think about how your thoughts and beliefs might be impacting your health. And I said, well, I'm working with this new guy named Deepak Chopra who teaches meditation. You should learn to meditate. And he said, I have nothing to lose. I'll do whatever you want. He read Louise. Deepak happened to be speaking in Palm Beach. And since I had total access to him, it's like, I need you to come to Hollywood, Florida and teach my stepfather how to meditate, which he did, and then my stepfather decided that he wanted to go on a macrobiotic diet. Anyway, 45 days later, he was 100% healed. His PSA was 1.2. There was no cancer anywhere in his body, and he lived another 10 years.
Holy
So I told my Newsweek contact that story that I just told you, and we got the story. That's how I got Deepak into Newsweek. And so, I leveraged that story forever. It's like, Doc, thank God you got sick. Thank God you got better, because you're helping me launch this really crazy stuff called meditation and Ayurvedic medicine.
So what you said it was your interest in these specific topics, but what was your motivator? I mean, you have this story, but before you have a story like this where your stepfather was dramatically healed by not modern medicine, what else was, how did you decide what moved you? Do you remember? Can you explain what it was, or what was the mechanism?
Working with Louise Haye, Louise at that time had self-published You Can Heal Your Life. It came with, there were mimeograph pages. You may not even know what those are. Mm-mm. There were these machines that had like a tub on it, and they had blue ink, and you had to roll it like that to get the pages. And then, then she would bind them. So that was the copy of her first book that I had. That was, this maybe was 1988 or something. And it was so interesting to think that, that your thoughts could impact your body, that I could have, if I'm having back pain, maybe I'm feeling unsupportive, or maybe I'm feeling insecure. And what's the affirmation I could say that could possibly turn that around? So that was fascinating to me. And then when Deepak came out with Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, was it that the book? Yeah, I think it was Ageless Body, Timeless. No, Perfect Health. He came out with Perfect Health. And suddenly I'm reading the exact same thing Louise said, but from a scientific medical perspective that was in total alignment with all the stuff I wanted to know and wanted to learn. Now, Louise was easier for me to understand. Deepak, I liked the tone of his voice and the frequency and the energy of his delivery. But honestly, even today, and he just lives around the corner from me, I can't understand half the things he talks about. They just go, shh. He's just like, he likes to go really, 3 fathoms down deep dish. And I'm like really simple. And I don't care why it works. I don't care to understand any of it. If it works, I'm going to use it. Like I do tapping all the time. I'm a big fan of EFT tapping. I can't tell you the miracles I've used it on all the time. I don't understand how saying I totally and completely love myself changes my life, but it does. And I don't need to know why.
Isn't that interesting? Some people really need to know why. It's those scientific minds. They need to figure that out. I'm the same as you, Arielle. I don't need to know why either. I love the mystical. I can stay there. I don't need to figure it out at all. Sean's a little bit more analytical. Hey, Sean.
Well, I ride the line. That's an interesting. It's interesting to me. You have a trust in that process for yourself. Both of you, actually. I've known Corrine for 10 years. You have a trust in this works for me. I've tested it on myself. I recognize and I'm aware that it works for me. I don't need you to know or understand that it works for me. I know that it works for me. Having that personal trust and that intuition on, what we call it mystical force. And I think that's what's really interesting about, your backstory is I recognize even now, 2020, almost 2021, that these are still very, woo-woo mystical topics. Late 80s, early 90s, midnight, these were very, taboo, woo-woo topics. And I guess I find it fascinating that you seem to integrate into that world and were, not just an advocate, but very instrumental in kind of breathing life into a lot of these, newfound discoveries and ways to be and ways to think and be in life.
Well, my belief is that one of my major talents is that I can spot talent. Right? Deepak would have become Deepak no matter what. I made it a lot easier for him, and he trusted me implicitly. If I said, Deepak, go do this, he would never ask what it was. He would just go and do it, but he was always going to be who he is, right? Same with Wayne Dyer. Wayne was always going to be Wayne. But, my ability was to see that I could sort of parent them along the way, and that's why when I shut my business down in December of 2004, I did it, because I was, I had a lot of good reasons, but one of the real reasons I did it was because I always believed that I had sacred contracts with all of my clients. And I had completed my final sacred contract with the final author that I was working with. And even though I could have all the business that I wanted, because I was really pretty much number one in the country at what I did at that time, I was done. And I knew that I was done. Now, did I know what I was going to do next? Absolutely not. I did not have a plan B. Zero plan B. I walked into the office one day, gave everybody 2 weeks severance, chopped up the lease, went home, and did not know what I was going to do.
So, wow, that's bold to say the least. So what practice have you developed and, that got you to that point? You seem very content. And I imagine even at that moment, you felt content. Do you have a meditation practice? What kind of a...
Oh, I'm a terrible meditator. And I've been taught by the best. I don't meditate. And I can't. It's just, it makes me very anxious. What I do is I can do the heart math, heart lock-in techniques, and I can drop from my head to my heart and get into heart coherence. And some people would say that that's a meditation, but it's not, because I've taken my friends who can do the TM flying thing and I've hooked them up to heart math stuff, and they cannot get into heart coherence when they're meditating. It's different things. It's not the same. But to keep myself sane and balanced, I do a variety of things. I do heart math. I do the Sedona method. I take lots of aromatherapy baths. I go for walks. And the tapping is probably my greatest resource. But to answer your question, on the day that I shut the business down, I was terrified.
Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't know what was next. But I did have faith that until I made space for whatever was next to show up, whatever was next couldn't show up. Because when I had the PR firm, I was making 100 phone calls a day. I had no time to consider anything. So, the third day after I had no work, Deepak happened to call me and he said, I'm in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I need you to come down here right away. I'm doing this project and I really need help. And it's a nonprofit and I can't pay you. I said, well, the good news is I've got plenty of time and I have a lot of miles on American. So, I'll come down for a couple of days. I ended up going down for 10 days. And when I got back, I still had no work. And I got a call from a best-selling author who I had never met, just randomly called. And he said, will you come to Ojai to meet with me? And I said, well, why? We had one friend in common. He said, I have a business proposition for you. It's for a startup, so there won't be any money up front. But if it takes off, you'll own a percentage of this company. And he goes, but I'm not going to tell you what it is over the phone. So Brian and I drove from San Diego to Ojai, which is, like a 4-hour schlep in traffic. We get to the home of Gay Hendricks. And Gay sits me down and he says, I want to start this company called the Spiritual Cinema Circle. And we go around and we find features and shorts and documentaries that have conscious and spiritual themes. And we put them on DVDs and people pay us $20 a month to get the DVD to get enlightenment at home with these movies. And then he showed me some of the movies. And I said, okay, I got nothing else to do. And I've got nothing but contacts. I know every single self-help spiritual author on the planet. All of them have email lists. All of them like to make money sending things out because there was a whole affiliate thing. This was before anybody knew what affiliate stuff was. I said, let's give it a try. Within 60 days, we were up and running at a profit. and Gay bought me a Lexus 450 hybrid as a bonus, like on, the 10th week. And we ended up selling the business 2 years later for $6 million.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
wasn't that the birth of Gaia?
So Gaia didn't exist yet. Gaia bought Spiritual Cinema Circle.
Okay.
And then Yurka was very excited to make Gaia. And he really wanted to acquire the library for Gaia. And so that was part of the whole deal. I ended up working with them for about a year afterwards. So the movies are all over there now. Now, the company sold for $6 million. I didn't make $6 million. I didn't even make $1 million. I had the opportunity to sell all of my stock. And I so didn't know what I was doing. I sold some of the stock, but I thought, wow, Gaia has an email list of 1 million customers. Imagine how we're going to grow this business and my stock is going to go up and it'll make even more money. Well, I can't go into all the technical shenanigans that went on. About a week after all this transpired, my stock became worthless.
Oh, no.
The good news was they had already committed to pay me $300,000 a year to run the marketing arm because they couldn't run it without me. So I didn't get the stock money, but I did get a job that was pretty cushy and really easy. And I stayed there for a couple of years and discovered why people hate working for corporations. I'd never worked for a corporation before. Looney Tunes.
Yeah,
Totally.
you're a self-employed person for sure, right? Your whole life.
I used to have my own business, not, this chain of command where, literally one of my responsibilities was to go to Boulder once a month for a 15-minute in-person meeting.
Oh, wow. Just wasteful, pointless,
And they put me up at the nicest hotel.
Yeah.
They gave me a limousine. I got treated like I was a rock star, which I wasn't. So that was nice, but it was crazy. But I had no plan. But if it served me not to have a plan, because if Gay Hendricks had called me when I was making 100 calls a day, I would have never taken his call for starters. And certainly if he had said, oh, I want you to do X, Y, and Z in a startup for no money, I would have said, you are fucking nuts. That's not going to happen, right? So that, all these things had to line up.
Wow, Lakshmi must be very strong in your chart.
I'd have to ask, I have a Vedic astrologer that I worship and adore, and I don't know. I didn't even know Lakshmi was in my chart. So I have Lakshmi statues all over.
I was going to say you just exude that, but of course you are the Shakti woman, which we will get to. But first, I do want to ask, if you don't mind sharing, how did you get introduced to Amma and get into Amma?
Oh, okay. So I was visiting with my chiropractor, and I was lying on the table. And on every wall of his office were photos of Amma. And I didn't know who she was. This was 1996 or something. And I asked my chiropractor, who's that holy woman? He said, oh, that's Ammaji, the hugging saint. He said, I just returned from India. I lived at her ashram, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'd really like to meet Amma. He said, well, next weekend she'll be in Newport Beach. And she's doing this weekend retreat. You should go to it. And he gave me all the information on how to sign up. And as I walked out of the office, he said to me, I'm going to tell you a secret. I said, what's that? He goes, they're going to tell you that Amma doesn't speak English. But when she's giving you a hug, you can whisper in her ear for a boon. It's like, well, what's a boon? He said, it's a wish. And he goes, and you'll know that she heard you because she'll squeeze you even tighter. So this got me thinking, it's like, oh, this is great. Now the workshop's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And that means I'm going to get at least 3 hugs, because back in those days, you could get a hug a day.
That's right.
And what am I going to ask her for Friday night? What am I going to ask her for Saturday night? And what am I going to... So on Friday night, I asked her to please heal my heart of anything that would stop me from having a soulmate. And she hugged me really tight. And then she put a Hershey's Kiss in my hand. And I thought I was really special. I didn't know everybody got a Hershey's Kiss. I got a Hershey's Kiss. And then the next day I went and did the whole thing, got in line again, got another hug. And this time while she was hugging me, I rattled off my my must-have list for my soulmate. I had like memorized it. And I said, Mama, please send me a soulmate. It needs to be blah, 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 blah. And she laughed and she hugged me really tight and she gave me another Hershey's Kiss. So that night I went to bed and I had this amazing dream. And in the dream, there were 7 women dressed in purple and they were all singing to me. And the lyrics of the song were, Arielle is the woman who comes after Beth. Arielle is the woman who comes after Beth. So when I woke up in the morning, I was so excited. I thought, oh, my soulmate's out there, but he's totally tied up with somebody named Beth right now. But now I have this clue. A week later, maybe it wasn't even a week, but a very short time later, I ended up having to go to Portland, Oregon for one of my authors. I had arranged for him to do this national TV interview, and the crew was going to go to his mansion on Lake Oswego. And Simon & Schuster had hired me, said, oh, you got to go up there and supervise the shoot and all this stuff. And I called the author's office and I talked to his business partner, this guy, Brian, who was a real yacky, chatty guy, always wanted to talk. And I'm like, I got to make 100 phone calls a day. I got to go. I can't talk to you. Anyway, I call and I say, listen, I'm coming up for the shoot. I'm flying into Portland. Here's my flight information. How do I get to Nick's house? And this chatty guy says, oh, I'll pick you up at the airport. I was like, oh, that's so nice. And he said, because I have this kind of car and I'll be outside in this sort of place. I can't come to the gate. This was back in the day when you could go to the gate because the airport's under construction. So that morning I get up, it's summertime. I put on my cutest summer dress and my cutest summer flats. And I was like, you know, I was a bikini model when I was younger. So like my younger body was pretty hot. I knew I was looking really good. And all the way on the flight up there, I'm feeling unusually nervous. And I'm not the nervous type. And I thought, oh, I must be nervous because I was doing a liver cleanse and I was sort of hypoglycemic. And I was thinking, oh, I'm just going to have some more lemon juice and maple syrup or whatever that crap was that I was drinking. So I get off the plane, I walk out, and there's the car, and there's the Brian, and I take one look at him, and my first thought is, I wonder who Beth is. And that's followed by the thought, you don't even know if he's married. And then I look at his hand, no wedding band, you know, and in the meantime, he's looking at me a little strangely. Anyway, we get in the car, we go to Nick's house. The crew is already set up. The lights are up. The host is there. The interview's about to start. I got there just in time. I sit down on this little bench and this Brian sits down next to me. And it was my job as the publicist to pay close attention to my client, the author, in this interview to make sure he's talking about his book. He's mentioning his book because it's not the host's job. The host wants to talk about the woo-woo. This is a guy who claimed to be the reincarnation of Paul the Apostle. So he's, you know, wanting to go on the woo-woo stuff. And anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm not listening. I'm not listening because I've become obsessed with the shoulders of this Brian person sitting next to me. And he's wearing this red polo shirt. And all I can think of is how badly I want to massage his shoulders. And it gets so intense that I start to sit on my hands. So I'm sitting on my hands, trying to make this feeling go away. And while I'm sitting on my hands, this voice, and I've never heard a voice before, the voice says to me, this is how it happens. This is who you're going to spend your life with. And now I'm really freaked out. You know, I'm hungry, my stomach's growling, I'm having uncontrollable urges to touch a stranger, and I'm hearing voices. And all of a sudden, all the house lights go up. The host is standing, the author is standing, and I realized I've missed the entire interview. And all I'm thinking is I see a back door and I'm thinking, I've got to get out that back door. I need some fresh air. This is all too weird. And I stand up and my client, the author, walks over. Brian's standing there. And the author says to Brian, why don't we take Arielle to dinner tonight before she catches her plane? And why don't you invite Elizabeth to join us? And now I'm thinking, holy shit, there is a Beth. It's an Elizabeth. It's his wife. And the voice comes back and says to me, no, they're just like brother and sister. And as I head to the back door, Brian grabs me and he stops me and he says, I have to ask you something. And I said, what? He said, when I picked you up at the airport, did I look familiar to you? And I said, kinda, why? And he said, well, I've been dreaming about you. And with that, I had to go get some air. I was freaking out. So in these shoots, it's an all-day shoot. We've done the first sit-down interview. Now we have to go to Powell's bookstore where the author pretends to be signing books. And then we have to go to the Rose Garden where we do the walking and talking shot. It's just this whole day shoot that's going to be a 10-minute piece on this crazy NBC show. And all day long, the voice is talking to me and I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, he's so not my type. How could he be the one? And anyway, we get to dinner and it's Nick, the author, his wife, the ghost writers of the book, of which there were two, the host, the producer, and this woman, Elizabeth, shows up. And it's a beautiful July night and the sun's out, even though it's 8:00 at night. And we're waiting for dinner and the dinner's not coming and the dinner's not coming. And finally I said to Brian, I said, I'm on the last flight out. I have to be on this flight. Let's go. Can you please take me to the airport? And so he arranged to have my trout dinner put into a box. And we jump in his car and we're speeding down this freeway headed to the airport. And I'm eating and I'm feeding him my dinner, and I start to hear things come out of my mouth that I cannot believe are coming out of my mouth. The first was this, I don't want to have any children. And he just about drives off the road, and he says to me, well, that's why Elizabeth and I have broken up. She wants to get married and have children. He said, I don't care whether I get married or not, but I definitely don't want children. I was like, good. And the other thing you need to know is I've been looking for a tantra partner. And I'm like, what are you doing? How can you say this? I still don't even know his last name. Anyway, we get to the airport and, I have like 7 minutes to run to the gate. And as we're getting out of the car, I say to him, I need to know your date, time, and place of birth. And he rattles it off as if it's the most normal thing in the world. And I run to the gate. I'm the last person on the plane, and I go home. The next morning, I get up, and as was my every Saturday morning, I would go to Torrey Pines to do this 1-hour hike up the mountain and down the mountain and along the beach. And on my hike, I run into my then Vedic astrologer, this guy named Mark. It's like, Mark, how auspicious. I met this guy yesterday. Here's his data. Will you look him up for me? And I keep walking and walking. I get home a while later. I go to my answering machine. Remember answering machines? The red lights beeping? Yeah. And then I hit the rewind and the little cassette thing rewinds. I hit play. There's Mark's voice. Hey, Arielle, I looked up your chart with Brian's. It's the clearest indication of a fated relationship I've ever seen. I predict you'll get married. Call me when you need wedding dates.
Holy shit.
Right? So 3 weeks later, we get engaged. And even though we got engaged in 3 weeks, I told him I wouldn't get married for at least a year because I'm a very sensible Capricorn. I said, I don't even know you. I said, I have all these feelings like we're meant to be together and you're my soulmate, but I'm not going to marry a stranger. He was fine with that. I know you asked me, how did I meet Amma?
No, this is where I was hoping it was go. It's perfect.
So he moved in, he moved from Portland to San Diego almost immediately. Like I woke up one morning and it's like, when did you move in? Everything was happening really fast. So we met on July 18th. Amma comes to California every November, except for this year. And I saw that Amma was going to be at the San Ramon ashram. And I said to Brian, oh, we have to go. You're going to love this. She's this holy woman and she gives hugs and it's really great. And we should go. And he was like, yeah, I want a hug from Amma. So we go. And by then I had made friends with the people who knew people and I could get us to cut in line and all that kind of stuff. And I was talking to my friend who had access. He was actually her publicist. And I said to him, I said, oh, I want you to meet my fiance. And I introduced Rob to Brian. And Rob says to me, well, you know, Amma does weddings. I was like, she does? Well, we need to have a wedding. And I said, well, how do you make that happen? He said, well, when you get your hug, tell Big Swami, the guy next to her, that you're engaged and ask her if she'll do a wedding. And she agreed. She agreed to do our wedding. And we knew that she was going to be back in Southern California in June. So, of course, that's when that would be our next opportunity. And so Amma married us in front of 2,000 people we didn't know at the end of Devi Bhava. So it was 6 o'clock in the morning after having been up all night. And it was just this magnificent, crazy event. And then that was our spiritual wedding. And then I knew that I wanted to be legally married. So a few days after our Amma wedding, at the time I was doing PR for a rock star named Kenny Loggins. You may remember who he is.
I know him, yeah.
Kenny called me and I told Kenny about the Amma wedding. I said, but we need to do, we need to have a real wedding. And Kenny was like, that's so cool. I've always wanted to get ordained. I'll do your wedding. And I said, well, not so fast. I said, you can do the wedding on one condition. He said, what's that? I said, you have to be our wedding singer. He said, oh, that's easy. So he said to me, and I know how to get ordained because my friend Gay Hendricks will help me do that. So that I met Gay for the very first time at my wedding, my legal wedding. And then we had a third wedding soon after that because I had another client who was the high priestess of Wicca for Manhattan. She was also a criminal defense attorney. She had 2 jobs. And she told me she wanted to perform a pagan hand fasting for us on the top of a mountain. So we had 3 weddings. And that's how I met Amma.
Well, you'd have to have 3 weddings to celebrate, a coming together like that. I mean, that's storybook. I mean, that's just amazing how many things can line up in the serendipitous nature of.
Well, just so you know, that was the short version.
I love that, man. That was incredibly enjoyable to, what's fascinating is how much you remember and how present and how aware and how specific all of those little things are. And, do you find yourself letting go and just getting into the flow of life? And do things like that happen in your life often? Or was that pretty unique for you?
No, I would say there's a lot of magic that happens. And I have a big capacity to receive magic. I just never know when it's going to come. But I do, of course, have my magic wand right here on my desk. And I've got lots of accoutrement everywhere. But since COVID started, since lockdown began here in San Diego on March 15th, everything's changed. The way I live my life has totally changed because before I would do a lot of long range manifesting. Oh, I want to go to Bora Bora. Okay, when would be a good time to go to Bora? And then I would do my little feelingizations and I would work on. Now I live in 2-hour segments. I don't make any plans. It's impossible to make plans because you'll only get disappointed because nobody has any answers. And there's not one human being alive right now on the planet that can tell you anything for sure. Nobody. So how do you exist in chaos? And so the way I exist in chaos is in 2-hour segments. I'll get to my desk usually about 10 in the morning. It's like, okay, what would I like to do for the next 2 hours? What's the next baby step to take? What is there to do? And, people say, well, don't you worry about things? It's like, well, you can't worry when you're in a 2-hour window. There's no point in worrying about anything because I'm clear I have no control except when I freak out, I've got my toolkit. Right?
Yeah.
So having all of that helps. Plus, I have this on my desk. I don't know if you're going to be able to read that, what that says. But what that says is santosha.
Uh-huh.
And santosha is the Sanskrit word for utter contentment. Because I used to have the goal of wanting to be happy. And what I discovered is happiness isn't the way to go. Happiness is conditional on people and places and things and experiences. But santosha, you can have contentment regardless of the circumstances. Santosha is the choice. And if I want to have sukha, which is the Sanskrit word for happiness and sweetness, I can have all of it. You know, it's just a choice. But the santosha, learning santosha really altered it, because I realized contentment is always within my grasp, regardless of how insane things get.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're, I'm assuming you're still down in California.
Yes, I'm in La Jolla.
Yeah, so you're...
Here's how I'm leaving San Diego. The only way I'm leaving San Diego is in a body bag.
Yeah. It is paradise.
It is paradise.
Absolute
It really
paradise.
is. Like, I like to travel. I like to visit. But this is my home.
Yeah. Well, and that's been this year. You know, part of the reason we're doing this podcast, or, you know, one of the, I guess, the symptoms of this podcast is, you know, kind of just watching how everybody has developed their practice, have developed their, you know, spiritual tools to, you know, to I guess, counterbalance the chaos that comes in life, the things that we can't, you know, possibly predict, the things that we possibly control. And what's interesting is this year is it's a massive global awareness of the fact that we can't control things and we don't know things and nobody's really in charge. That was, I think, one of the things that struck me, you know, in mid-30s, you know, naively, I assumed, because we have leaders, that there are people trying to figure out the best course of action for people on a whole. And that's not true necessarily.
Well, it's true. It's just they aren't the people in charge right now. I mean,
Correct.
Let's remember, Obama had a pandemic cohort of people prepared and ready.
Yeah.
And that orange idiot decided to throw them out.
Yeah.
I won't say his name, you know, but what we are experiencing a 7.3 billion person nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
You know, and God willing, 22 days from now, you know, the worst will be over. It won't be over, but the worst will be over.
Yeah.
You know, we still have to deal with the 72 million, you know, QAnon crazy people out there who think the orange one is the second coming, you know.
I love it. Well, no, but you're right. I mean, and that's what's been very, I guess, nurturing and healthy doing this weekly is finding out that there are other people that have a practice, that have a way, that have questions, and kind of bridging the gap instead of everybody just being out in the ether. You know, kind of like you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, where it's like, am I alone? Where's my tribe? You know, where are the people that feel the same, or at least feel in the way that I feel? Is there anybody out there that sees the world like I'm seeing it, or has this whole other dimension of experiences navigating you?
For me, the benefit of social media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, so I have close to 5,000 friends on Facebook. I don't know all of them, because when I joined Facebook in 2008, I was so flattered anytime somebody wanted to be my friend. I just said yes. So I ended up with a lot of people I don't know. But since March 15th, I've gotten rid of hundreds of them.
Yeah.
You know, I've been unfriending and unfollowing, you know, because it's my personal page, you know, and anybody who wants to debate insanity with me, that's it. They're gone.
Yeah.
You know, like if they want to tell me that you're infringing on my personal rights, telling me to wear a mask, it's like, you know,
Exactly.
toodles.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, and that's the other thing is, you know, we have to realize that it's okay. You don't have to do it, but isn't it the nice thing to do? You know, isn't it? There's courteous things that we can do to to help everybody get through this. And
Well,
I think
I
that's
mean, it's a couple of things. I mean, the science has been out there long enough that there's no reason for anybody not to do it. It's not dangerous. It's not going to hurt you, and it will save lives. That's all there is to it, you know? So if you want to be a jerk about it, go be a jerk on somebody else's page, not on my page, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think social media for finding a tribe is really helpful. I had a funny thing happen the other day. I wrote a newsletter on, you know, finding the light after the darkness or something like that. Anyway, it was a really deep, emotional, vulnerable, spiritual piece about what I've learned over the last year and how I've, you know, was cycling through the 5 stages of grief, sometimes within 5 minutes, all at once, you know. Anyway, there was that kind of sweet piece. And my friends, you know, all said, oh, I really needed to read that today. Oh, I totally agree. Oh, I'm going to share this with so-and-so. It got a really nice reception. And then I get this one woman who I used to know really well. She used to be my personal trainer years ago, writing about how that because of obese people, the economy was shut down because, you know, people who can't have any willpower and eat and exercise were the cause of the shutdown and COVID. And she just went off on this whole conversation. And I wrote to her and I said, did you mean to write this on my page? Because what you're saying doesn't relate at all to what I was saying, you know? And then she like wrote back with more of that same theme. And then, of course, my friends popped in and said to her, oh, it sounds like you really hate fat people. And I said to her, don't you understand that obesity is part of the problem with racism? You know, poor people live in neighborhoods that don't have grocery stores. Yeah. So even if they wanted to eat healthy, they can't. They don't have access to good food, you know? And then she writes me back, oh, well, I adopted a Black child from Africa. I'm not a racist. And I was like, I didn't say you were a racist. I said obesity is part of the racism problem. So finally, my people attacked her so much that she deleted herself.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Which is great. You know, it was like, because I thought, you know, we had mutual friends. So I thought, well, I'm not going to just block her, you know, and pretty much everybody who read it was like, what's the matter with you? Like, you know,
you probably gave her more time because you did know her before. I mean, I commend you for having the patience that you did with her, because, you know, that's what needs to happen is we do need to listen to each other, even if it's different views. But what happens is, as you found, is that there is no listening. Like there wasn't even a listening in what you had said, what she wrote.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can't talk reason, logic, and common sense to people who don't have the capacity to think for themselves. And that's a nice way of saying they're stupid.
Well, and that's part of the, I mean, I think when people are having a mass, you know, panic, socially, emotionally, you know, and there isn't somebody who knows what's going to come out of this or how it's going to go. I think people have a sense of trust in a society and the way a society works. And when that goes away and you don't have, you know, a spiritual center or, you know, some kind of an intuitive center of whatever that is, you just lose your compass. There's no due north, you know?
You know, you've raised an interesting word. You said the word spiritual. And I can't tell you how many meditation and yoga teachers in California have jumped on the whole QAnon thing.
I know.
And they're the ones saying, oh, if you're wearing a mask, you're buying into fear, not love. And it's like,
oh man,
I'm not buying into fear. I'm into like reason and caution.
Yeah.
You know, the two people I love most in the world are high risk. My husband and my mother both have underlying conditions. You know, my husband was a pro athlete in 2 sports. He's led a healthy lifestyle. He's meditated for 30 plus years. You know, through no fault of his own, things happened. He got parasites in the Ganges, for starters. You know, so stuff happens.
Yeah.
You know, so for somebody to say you're choosing fear over love, you know, that's a throwaway line.
Yes.
I think what's happened is for me, spirituality is not about reading Marianne Williamson or Deepak Chopra books. It's not about going to hot yoga. It's not about having green drinks. It's not about, howling at the moon. It's about how much love and compassion and seva do you put out to the world. Mm. And you don't even have to believe in God to be a true spiritual person.
Absolutely.
Right? But to call yourself spiritual because you have 16 pairs of Lululemons is bullshit.
It's a very California statement right there.
I only know that what you said is a very accurate way of putting it, but I don't know what Lululemons are. So that's all. But I got your gist.
Like if Gucci were to make yoga pants,
gotcha.
Okay. They're super expensive. They're nothing special. So they have very fancy stores, and the bag that you walk out with is sort of like a status shopping bag.
A yoga status.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm happy to say I've never purchased a pair of Lulus. I've been against them from the beginning. I'm a Fabletics girl myself. I love they're great quality. Okay, so we could wind down right now, and we can wind down right now. Can I just get, because I do want to touch on what you're currently doing, because all from what you sent me and what we're going to talk about in the intro about you, you are the love goddess right now. In fact, my BFF of 30 years took your Shakti workshop 4 years ago and met her soulmate 6 months later.
So you're calling it a Shakti workshop. I don't have anything called Shakti. I have soulmate secret workshops.
Yeah, I think that's what she took for some reason. Yeah. So she took Eddie did. We had her on the podcast. So she's Eddie Kenny. She's up in Newfoundland. And she took your workshop 4 years ago, and 6 months after.
You do it at Omega?
No, I think it was online.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of courses online.
Yeah, I think it was online that she did it, because she's in Newfoundland. She could go to Omega, but for that time she did it online. And 6 months later, she met her honey that she's still with.
This stuff works.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all there is to it. It absolutely 100% totally works. We're doing the law of attraction all day long anyway. This is just doing it with a level of consciousness that you're actually manifesting something you desire, as opposed to running away with all your negative thoughts. My friend Wayne Dyer always used to say, don't believe every thought that you have.
Yeah. So but all the 5, there's like 5 books you have right now that are on the soulmate and right? I mean, that's what your focus is.
I've written 11 books.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few out there, but so shoot, what do you want to know?
Well, that's your passion right now. So how did that happen?
Oh, okay. So when I was 43 years old, I woke up one morning and I didn't even have my eyes open. I was just kind of feeling around the bed looking for my 25-pound cat, who was usually sleeping next to me, and the cat wasn't there. And what I did feel was this big, empty, expansive bed. And as I was feeling this empty, expansive bed, I had this thought, which was basically, oh no, I forgot to get married. And I'm lying there in bed thinking, how did that happen? Like, I'm 44 and I have this, I'm in great shape, and I've got this amazing condo in Beverly Hills and a successful business and lots of friends, and I'm relatively attractive. How is it I'm not married? And when I really looked into it, I saw that I had put all my time and energy and attention on building my career. And the only time I thought about men was at the same time every week. It'd be a Saturday night around 11 o'clock, and I'd be driving home from a gala, a party, a screening, and club, and I'd notice that I was all alone in my car. And I'd think, oh, I would have had so much more fun at the screening if I had a boyfriend. On Monday morning, I'm going to start working on my dating life. And then Monday morning would come, and I'd get to the office, and they're screaming at me, "Good Morning America's on line 2, and Deepak's on line 3." And, and I'd be off and running and having really a great time. I loved my life until Saturday night at 11 o'clock. I'd be driving home alone again. So I, at that point, had been really mastering law of attraction stuff for quite a while, and decided, well, I wonder if it'll work on my love life. Could I manifest a soulmate? And I wrote down 9 pages of notes of every prayer, process, and ritual I'd ever done to manifest all the other things in my life, from my client list to my sports car to my condo to my trips to Paris. And I gave it a shot. And at the time, I wasn't tracking how long anything took because I didn't think I'd ever need it. But somewhere within the span of a year, Brian and I met. And after we got married, I became the poster child for single women over 40. And they would always grab me and say, how do I get a Brian? How do I get a Brian? And so I would sit down and I would tell them the process. And then sometime later, they'd call and say, oh, it worked for me too. And so somebody had said to me, well, you should write a book. And at that point, I'd already written like 7 books. Like, oh, I don't want to write another book. But the internet was really starting to get hot. And someone said, well, why don't you make an internet product? I was like, well, what's that? They said, oh, you make a bunch of CDs and you record them, and then you write a workbook to go with the CDs, and then you put up a website, and then you send emails out. It's like, well, I know how to send emails out. I know how to market. So I created this thing called the Soulmate Kit, and it did pretty well. And then somebody at HarperCollins saw it and called me up and said, we want to turn this into a book. So that became the Soulmate Secret. And then, it took off. It's in 21 languages in 40 countries. And it still sells because it works.
And that is this seems to be your current passion right now. Is that right?
Well, I have multiple missions, but one of them is to teach people how to find love, keep love, and be love. One of them is I've just finished my first novel and I'm in some revisions, and then my agent's going to sell it. I've got somebody else who wants to turn it into a Netflix series. So that's another big passion. And then tomorrow, in like 12 hours from now, I'm launching a huge mission in India called Girl Power Project India to reach the 100 million adolescent girls in India, to teach them the skills to stay in school, not get married young, not get pregnant, not be sexually abused, and what to do if somebody touches you the wrong way, social justice, and how to become an entrepreneur. And we have a very successful program that's been in Uganda for years, which we were just studied by the Texas A&M University, sent a team to study our Uganda project, and they just published the report in this big international journal. And we have like a 95% efficacy rate.
Wow.
So I'm launching that tomorrow. I need to raise $80,000 in the next 3 days.
Woohoo! That will happen. You can do it. If anybody can, you can.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Arielle. It's great to see you. It's great to hear the stories. Thank you so much for sharing your amazing stories and pieces of your life with us. It's just been such a joy. Beautiful.
You're welcome. Well, if anybody listening is single and they don't want to be single, I have a free ebook on my website. It's a pop-up. So if you go to soulmatesecret.com, this thing pops up and it says free online dating guide. And it's only 9 pages, but it will tell you absolutely everything you need to do to find your soulmate online.
And
very cool.
And it works.
Yeah, that work.
Excellent. And good luck with the Girl Power. I'll be keeping in touch with you on that for sure.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Very nice to meet you. And
yes, nice to meet you too, Sean.
Very much enjoy your life and your stories. That was extremely fun to hear. And so I hope we get to talk again soon, and maybe we'll meet this elusive Brian someday.
We will. Oh, yeah. We're going to be interviewing him on January.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, January, 3rd week in January.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye. Oh man, that was an exciting ride with Arielle. I really enjoyed just listening, to the point where I felt like a couple times I was like, okay, now it's time to ask a question. It's like, no, just keep talking. Just keep going on with more details. I loved very intricate, vulnerable way she, and she was just very open through, all the stories she told, and, the various, I don't know, parts of her life. And she's a very different guest than I think we've had in the past yet.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that. I mean,
Mhm.
and that's the plan of the future too. Is we have people on all different walks of life and their, mystical turning points, and she was very different than what we've had, but fascinating. I mean, it was so good to talk to her. It started off when I text all of I email all of our guests, link to the Zoom before the day, usually a day or two before, and then I give them the question that we're going to start with and how I'm going to word it, but that's the only question they get, is just how we're going to start the conversation. And so she emails me back right away, and because the question is, when did you become a seeker? She's like, I when did your childhood beliefs no longer work for you? And when
Yeah.
did you become a seeker? And she said, my childhood beliefs always worked for me, and I've always been a seeker. And I was like, okay, this is going to be a fun conversation. And it was, I met Arielle through Deepak Chopra years ago when I used to, work a lot with the Chopra Center. I used to sing at a lot of the events. And I actually spent New Year's Eve when they thought it was the Y2K thing. So going from 1999 to
Mhm.
2000, I spent with, a couple hundred other Chopra people in Palm Springs at this big hotel with Deepak and everything. And I ended up I knew Arielle and her husband, Brian, through the Chopra Center, because it was actually pretty small back then. But I ended up at their table New Year's Eve. And that's how I really
Gotcha.
got to know them better. And funny story is, I've always, you don't know this one, Sean.
Yes. Dirt.
So it is dirt. I've always believed that whatever you do New Year's Eve, it has the power to bring in the energy for the year.
Mm.
And so typically over my life, I've been single New Year's Eve. So it's like, okay, if I just make out with a really good looking guy New Year's Eve, then I will manifest, some soulmate energy for the coming year. And so here we are, a couple of hundred of us at this hotel in Palm Springs. We're hanging out at the pool and we're having dinners. And I'm like looking for the good looking guys in the group. And there's like one in a couple hundred people. There's one single one that he's like really tall. He's like 6'6". He was the photographer. His name was Trent. And so I was like, okay, I want to find him at midnight and make out with him at midnight. So sitting with Arielle and Brian, and there was 10 other people at our table, and midnight comes and Trent's nowhere to be found. And so I'm hugging and kissing. I think I hugged and kissed my friend Shay, who's still a good friend of mine today. Cause that's 20 years ago now. And she makes the jewelry for the Chopra Center, and we were both single at the time. So anyways, then Deepak's going to take everybody on this gondola at 2:00 in the morning or something. Everybody's going to head up to the gondola. Oh no, it must've been 4 a.m. to see the sunrise.
Gotcha.
So I decided I don't want to go because it's freezing cold. And so I'm sitting in the lobby saying goodbye to everybody, and I'm just kind of hanging out. And all of a sudden everybody leaves and Trent walks up. And so we just start talking. And so anyways, finally we end up in this ballroom that's empty because he's got a roommate and I've got a roommate, and we totally make out as in kiss, like nothing else. We kiss in this ballroom that's we turn the lights off and lay on the floor and make out for a couple hours. Right. And fall madly in love, which is what I used to do in 2 hours, and then I was supposed to fly out, a day so later, and so was he. He lived in Colorado, and we both extended our stay. So we drove from Palm Springs back to La Jolla, and we actually had lunch with Brian and Arielle.
Gotcha.
So that so that connection to them is one of my romantic antics, because it's interesting. Arielle talks about that she'd never had that happen with anybody else. I've had that happen a lot. I'm going to say hundreds, but probably not hundreds, but a lot. I've had that happen where the song that I wrote after I met Trent was "This Is Love." And then I used to joke, "This is love for 1 week. Love, love." And it just used to happen to me all the time. I used to meet these people. There was a really strong connection. And so, that was my connection with Arielle and her husband, Brian, the deeper connection that we've had. And that's my story.
I like it, man. And that's what's, I think oftentimes we get into, well, I don't know, I certainly get into this spiritual inquiry to such a degree that we forget to have these free moments and just kind of the go with the wind moments, because I don't have those kind of moments. But maybe you've been having them for both of us.
I think I've been having them for, like, that's why I'm on such a sort of monk path now, because I really, So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. I mean, well, and that's what's, what's interesting. And you and I have had plenty of conversations where, we've hashed out. That's why I said, I don't know this story. That's a unique thing not to know some of these, stories of yours, because it's funny to rehash these just crazy, chaotic, serendipitous moments where it's like, oh, and just so you know, this is how I know I'm not in control because, 10 reasons. And that's what I really enjoyed about Arielle was, if you listen to her stories, she has I don't want to say, not that she's not a powerful woman, but she's very present to her life. Kind of a person, and you kind of start to think, well, maybe this person's just really in control of their life, and as it turns out, she's very good at letting go of certain parts of her life,
Yes.
and that's the difference. Is I think why manifestation can work, and just being free in the moment to express what's in the moment, and that's. So what's interesting is because we did talk about her answer before the podcast. We talked about my childhood beliefs always worked for me, and I've always been a seeker. Well, I don't know about you, but I took that as her childhood programming and her beliefs that she was programmed with worked for her. But that's not what she was talking about, which was really great to uncover why her childhood beliefs worked for her was because she, from the get-go, lived in a different dimension as from culture, society, from her own, it sounds like we didn't get too much into her childhood, but she had a whole separate world going on.
She was born mystical. She remembered things before she was born, which is what, when she emailed me back and said that, because I know what she's done in her life.
Gotcha.
I kind of was thinking that would be more likely be the story than her, being, I kind of had a feeling that it would be a similar thing to me where she kind of remembered before and in touch, because she's just so mystical. I mean, everything she's ever done is, especially as you have talked about in the early 90s, when there wasn't the mystical, there wasn't the self-help spiritual, and not just self-help spiritual, but really mystical, like the people that were kind of out there a little bit, and these out there stories that now are sort of a little bit more mainstream. But back then, it was very, very new when she, first started working with all these authors. She's really is the mother of, or the co-mother, the co-author, the co-creator of the self-help spiritual movement of the 90s.
Yeah, she seems to have been very integral in manifesting that coming out from, the less mainstream. And that's why I stumbled over that question early on, because it's hard to explain or put that, like, it's still somewhat of a niche demographic of people that
it is still,
that have that are into spiritual self-help. But to say that, I mean, there's millions of people, still into the spiritual self-help, I would say, from so many different angles. And there's, you go to any bookstore, and now with Amazon, I mean, you can find everything. And, it's still, if you go to a bookstore and you look in the self-help section, I think there's a little bit of a social awkwardness at times, depending on what region you live in the, the US. It's not, it's definitely not taboo. There are people that still think it's woo-woo, and, they have their beliefs. And so I think there's still there is a social stigma about it, but 30 years ago, you couldn't even hardly have these conversations in a lot of ways. So it is, I wish we had, a couple more hours to even hash out some of that process of like, what was that like for you? Did it feel like a battleground? But then again, I don't know that we would have gotten that from her, because I don't think she looks at it that way. It was just, this is what I can do. I feel this, and she did mention a couple different times, like, no, I turned this down because I didn't feel like that resonated or wasn't on my frequency. So
she worked with very successful authors, but like she said, they weren't famous when she met them.
Right.
Like one of my favorite stories that's personal, but is Oprah Winfrey talks about when the first time she had Deepak on, which I remember, and I've actually tried to find the clip. I've been able to find the second time he was on, but the first time he was on was much like probably 1992. Mm-hmm. And I saw it, and I didn't understand what he was saying. And she said that's what happened is she was in the middle of the interview, and all of a sudden she looked up and she could tell the audience didn't know, was totally lost on what he was saying. And she's like, does anybody, she kind of stopped what he was saying. She's like, does anybody here get, I think it was in between, she said, commercials, where she started asking, they're like, no, did we know what Deepak Chopra is saying? They're like, no. And that's when she actually, she still would have spiritual people on, but she started a satellite radio interview show early in the 90s so that she could interview spiritual people and get that need. And then it was a few years later, she started to have Gary Zukav on when people, but she had to keep it a little lighter. Like that's why she left actually her show and started her own OWN, Oprah Winfrey Network. Originally, it was to really talk to the spiritual authors. Now, of course, it's a whole network, so she has a lot of other shows on there now. But her baby is the Super Soul Sunday Conversations. Mm-hmm. So the first time I heard Deepak on there, 92, maybe that was a few years before, maybe 2 years before I started meditating. I didn't have any clue what he was saying either. And then I saw him about a year or two later on PBS. And I was ironing my clothes, and I remembered like my jaw literally dropped open. He was doing one of those PBS specials that him and Wayne Dyer used to do. And I understood, it was like he was unlocking a key in my soul to remember everything, like everything he was talking about, I was connecting with. And I was like, my life will never be the same. This is what I've been looking for. How do I study with this guy? And that's when I started, there was I think it took another year for him to come up with the meditation certification out in California that I went out there. And that's how I started studying with him and met him. And
wow.
Arielle. Yeah.
Well, and that's the interesting part about bringing not even really a movement, bringing a movement into the social consciousness. The early stages of that is going to be like, it's going to seem like almost nothing because people don't have context for what you're even talking about in a lot of senses, that it takes a second, third, or fourth conversation. But the masses are generally going to react, either confused or angry, or like this is some sacrilegious, new movement. But there are people that it opens up, and it does. It is a key, But I just can't even imagine, because I don't remember what the early 90s were like. I wasn't old enough to really have an adult mind about it. But looking back, I understand. I understand now what was happening and what the social mindset was at that time to a degree that I can, and knowing how much friction I've had in my spiritual upbringing, where, it was the early 2000s before I was even, in high school. I know what that was like for me, and how much I was craving those kinds of conversations, but didn't feel like I had access in a lot of ways to that. I'm sure 10 years prior, there were people just like me that there was a thing that wasn't right, and they didn't know what it was. There was no frame of reference anywhere in their social culture that could lead them anywhere, and then this movement happens, and I think like anything, the symptoms of that movement are, what you guys mentioned at the end is, paying whatever for Fruity Lulus. What would you guys call those? Fruity Lulu, Fruity
Lululemon.
Lululemons.
Lululemon.
Inevitably there are going to be degrees of that get, I don't know, compromised in a way that, okay, well, now you got to buy this specific yoga pant to even go do yoga. It's like, yeah, you're going to get those things, but mostly what you get out of that is, I think what's happening now is, yes, the world is in chaos in a lot of ways. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty. Yes, there's a lot of this, da, 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 da. But if you had already been on a spiritual seeking process, or on a spiritual enlightened person to the degree that questioned your surroundings, none of what you're seeing now is new. It's only new for the mass consciousness, for the social consciousness. But uncertainty has always been there. Chaos has always been there. The choice of how to act in these situations, how to respond instead of react in a situation, there really isn't any new anecdote in this this massive year of calamity. It's just, from my view, it's showcasing how important it is to be the center point of awareness in your own life, and question and learn and grow and gain in that compassion and connectedness for your surroundings, because that's ultimately going to be a healthier way to live than the chaos that tries to, draw you in.
I liked her technique of 2-hour increments. So she's a big one to want to manifest,
Yes.
She said trip to Bora Bora and different things, and all her books and things like that. And now, and for the last, 8 months, it's, for her, it's just, 2-hour increments. So I think everybody has their own way, whatever they've gotten out of 2020. Because ultimately that's how we grow, is through challenges, and that's how our perspectives shift, is through the chaos and living in and realizing how uncertain it is. My perspective is, it's always been that. It's always been uncertain. It's just, we're not allowed to have the illusion of it right now.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows anything, when if the vaccine will work and how long it'll take people to get vaccinated, all the questions that we all have. We might not have had those specific questions the last couple of years, but we have had this illusion of, and some people have more of an illusion of the security, whether they're married or have a job, they're lawyers or doctors, or, have a job that they've had for 20 years. They have this sense of security, that because life has been this way every day for the past 20 years, it's going to be this way every day. And we just haven't had that in
Right.
2020. And yet, all the people that we talked to, and of course, you and I have talked about the many gifts that it has been. You and your family have had this beautiful womb that you've created, on your property, your beautiful property, and the place that you've built, that you're sitting in right now. And so many gifts that, and I've been in total monkhood for, the last 8 months, and quite quiet. And so, that's when we can, we can't, when we're so busy all the time, whether it's traveling or creating things or working, or, busy with social media all the time and movies and a device all the time, there's no self-reflection about what we've done in the past and how we can do things differently. And it's not until you actually slow down and create a little bit of space in your life, and whatever way that looks, that you can actually see what's going on, what's working, what you want to do differently, and what you'd like more of. I was listening to Pema Chodron the last week or so, and she's a Buddhist nun, and she talks about, I love her perspective of meditation and quiet time. It's actually a Buddhist perspective, is getting friendly with yourself, creating friendliness to yourself first. And then eventually when you have friendliness, because what do people do when they first sit down and meditate? They're like, I don't want to sit with myself. I don't want to sit with all these thoughts and all these negative things, or these, whatever it is. I get, for a depressed person, all the depressed thoughts. For a worried person, they get all these worried thoughts. For anxious people, they get all the anxious thoughts. For the person that's projecting into the future, they get all those thoughts. And so that's another way of saying, of course, knowing yourself, which we talk about a lot. But I like that perspective of becoming friendly with yourself.
Yeah.
Friendliness for the self, compassion for the self, for all parts of yourself. And then you see that, and then what happens is then you see that other people, because we're all the same, we all have the same desires. We all want to be happy. We all want to be healthy. And now different, that means different things for different people, which is fine. But that's what we want for ourselves and other people. And so the more we can know ourselves and be okay with being alone with ourselves and really discover this friendliness within our own being, then that's what we can share in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting process. And it's a unique process for everyone, because it's letting go of all the things that you're not. And I know this is not something I'm making up. It's letting go of all the things that you're not. And that tends to be a very sticky process. And it's a Velcro that wants to re-Velcro itself. And, I think it's very important to have. And what I think was interesting is, Arielle living the life that she lived, being with some of the greatest meditation teachers that you can find, going through this, and you would expect that she would be like, I crush meditation. I love it. It's a part of my life. And what you get is, it doesn't work for me. I don't resonate with meditation. It's something that takes me out of the experience, or, however she put it. So she says, so I have my toolkit and I have my process, and it's not, don't take this as don't go meditate. That's not the goal here, or the point here. But what it is I think it showcases how unique each person's individual process is, and how different their reflection is, and how different their light is, and how they carry it. And she is a very unique kind of a person, and she's lived her life that way. And I love that. And I appreciate that. And I think so often, and we touched on this a little bit towards the end, is we begin to attach our spiritual identity to either a teacher or a practice, and not is it a process or practice that actually works to, like you just said, be with yourself, find yourself, discover yourself, sit with yourself. Because when we meditate, are we meditating because a guru said we should? And if I don't meditate, this guru is going to be upset with me. Or, and that guru can be anything. It can be any practice. And I think what is, and this has been a big hurdle for me, and maybe I'm still hurdling it, is being honest and recognizing and getting over the hurdle of, am I doing this spiritual process because I'm convinced that this is part of my identity, or does this actually bring me to that center point, do I actually sit with myself in it? And do I actually like, or do I not like who I am, or do I even know who I am? I'm in that kind of reflection, and I think it's a time thing for everybody. And it sounds like It sounds like Arielle was face to face with who she is as a spiritual individual at a very young age, and she accepted that about herself. You know,
and then this became her playground. Like that's what she's a soul who knew who she was, where she came from. She was mystical. And then this is just her playground.
Yes.
You know, there's not a lot of angst. Didn't seem like there was angst in her life about the, you know, same with Patty too, you know, and Dawn for that matter, hasn't been a lot of angst. You know, so we all come to it in different ways and approach life in different ways. You know, again, coming back to sort of full circle from the beginning is she forgot to get married in her mid 40s. She was so busy having a good time, manifesting an amazing life and having great things happen that she forgot. It was like almost an afterthought. Whereas for me, you know, right from the get-go, I wanted to fall in love and wanted my soulmate in a desperate way from the time I was like 4 years old. Right. And then, so that's what I got. Talk about law of attraction is I attracted that desperate sort of temporary, you know, passionate love. I was addicted to that, like first, you know, which is all projection. You know, when you meet someone, there's that major chemistry, right? I got that over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And over again.
Well, and I think what is interesting is that when she hit that was a turning point for her, is realizing that, oh, I forgot to fucking get married. I think not having the depression programming, she didn't seem to have that, you know, I'm speculating, of course, but a lot of people, when they find that they have lack of, or I don't have the love of my life, or I don't have my soulmate, I'm lacking in my soulmate. See, that wasn't the mechanism for her. It was, oh, I forgot to put awareness, attention, and focus on this area of my life. It wasn't that, I mean, obviously she didn't have her soulmate. She said she didn't really think about it until, you know, Saturday night at 11. But she owned the reason why in a big way, which was I wasn't putting focus and awareness on finding a soulmate. And I think what happens is a lot of people, and this is not just for your soulmate, this can be for a lot of things, is when you realize you're lacking, your focus and awareness becomes on the lacking instead of the finding or the discovering or the potential of that coming into fruition. And, you know, I think that's kind of one of her secret weapons, as it seems, is there's not a lot of focus for her on the why something is or isn't. This just fucking works for me. This is the world I live in. And in a lot of ways, I envy that immensely. As you know, I microanalyze the fuck out of everything. So I envy that. But I think her secret weapon is, okay, here's something I just discovered. What I discovered is I haven't found my love. Okay, now I'm going to focus on finding my love. That it's a very basic, integrated stepping stone process. But her thing is just, okay, go find now. And I think that's, you know, served her very well. And I think it's, you know, a beautiful thing. But she also doesn't, you know, what I loved about her love story and finding, you know, meeting Brian and that whole thing is, she wasn't hiding the fact that she was totally beside herself in that moment. You know, I love that. I love the way she put it. She's like, I was hungry. My stomach was growling. I had the impulse to massage a stranger and I just had to get some fresh air, you know, and I love that she was so casual about the calamity of that situation, you know, and I wasn't doing my job. I wasn't paying attention. I was just lost in this moment, but she still sees the moment and followed, you know, whatever that relationship with intuition is. And she's like, obviously there's something here. I need to focus and be you know, aware of this. And I can't worry about things like, am I going to say the right thing or am I going to say the wrong thing? You know, and I love that. She's like, I found myself saying things I shouldn't and wouldn't ever say. And, you know, there's a courage to that, or there's, I don't know. I don't want to say fearlessness, because she had, you know, I was terrified with all this stuff, but she still went on the adventure. And I think I can resonate personally with the fact that I forgot to go on a lot of adventures. I forgot to take spiritual risks and trust the gravity that was very clearly pulling me in a direction with someone, with something, with some, and you know, whatever. And instead of just being in life, instead of using this life as a playground, that the fear for me manifested micromanaging and trying to anticipate the outcome of something. So once I anticipate the outcome, well, then I have something to attach to. Great. So now when that doesn't come out the way I expected, I'm going to be disappointed and I'm going to lose trust in the process. When in fact, I never actually trusted in the process and went with the wind, rode the wave. And that was the biggest lesson I think that I was having internally from that, is fucking live your life. Speak your truth.
And trust the process.
And trust the fucking process.
Yeah.
So that's what I got out of that.
I love that.
You know, it was a mirror for living life, man. And not just,
well, you do that already, Sean, in I feel like you do that with your children, the way you're raising your children and the way you're living your life in Wisconsin, you know, creating, like, I think you are, or maybe you're settling into that more, maybe now in the last, you know, couple years. And you did that with Elliott Root too, you know, I mean, that was a huge leap of faith that took a lot of guts and blind faith and trust of a lot of times.
And I agree with you. It's certainly this is not a binary thing, a black and white. Like, I didn't do that, and now I am doing it. It really, for me, I think comes down to the lesson and the learning is how much time was focused on fear or apprehension instead of on just living. It's more of the focus and the awareness. I recognize that I was putting a lot more of my awareness on fear or on an attachment to an outcome that wasn't in line with the gravity that was drawing me through.
From your childhood programming.
From my childhood programming, and which is what, you know, and what's fascinating about being up in Wisconsin, which is where I was born and raised, very close to, I've had to develop a new relationship because, and the people, I have some family members that are closest to me, you know, brothers and cousins, and a lot that did like what I did was leave, you know, the social programming, because that was the only way to get away from it, was to escape. And that was a fear for me coming back into it, was how much of that was I going to regress back into. And there has been moments of that where I tend to act in a certain way when I'm around different family members for certain different reasons. But what I'm letting myself do, so this is a, bear with me. I'm going to try to go through this for me, because I think it's important because of how much I'm focused on understanding myself through this process. And I definitely feel myself in certain moments shifting and changing how I act, how I behave to a certain degree because of my surroundings, because of the programming. But what I don't do afterwards is feel ashamed or guilty or any of those other, I don't feel depressed. I just call it for what it is. Programming is strong, and these are strong programmed gravities for me. We'll call them trauma points, not from a negative point, but the people that you surround your life with that helped program your childhood that you then peeled away from, they still are, they're like these beacon points for that programming, and they will inadvertently try to draw you in. And the practice has been, oh, wow, I digressed back into that programming. Let me look at that, and next time, maybe I won't. That's the healthy push and pull, right? Because I'm learning who and how I really am in these moments, or how I really want to be in these moments. And what I'm talking about and what I recognized in the past was there was a lot of focus on fear or shame or embarrassment, or I'm not good enough because I digressed, or I didn't do the right thing, so fuck, I'm not as good. And now there's what's that?
Insecurity.
Exactly. Great word for it. Yes. There was a lot of insecurity because it's fucking hard to peel away from that, which you are not. And that's what I think is empowering about a lot of these conversations, but a lot about, what I love the most about this conversation was how it was an affirmation of how to be yourself without doing, X amount of time of self-doubt and self-repression and depression, and without all that garbage that you pile on after the fact, because this waking up process is very difficult. And what has been absolutely certain is there's definitely multiple turning points in almost every guest's life at certain, at random points, on their timeline. And I think that makes it feel okay to be in my own process and feel comfortable in my own process and not try to identify or model after anybody else's process. Rather, there are certain little beautiful gravities or affirmations or inspirations. Take those inspirations from these other people's processes and figure out what your magic is. What is your inspiration to yourself? That's what this process has been for me. And I feel uplifted right now. I feel a little sassy. Arielle's a little sassy. She's a little sassy, and I like that. It's fun to hear her, just explain her life and be vulnerable in her life.
That's beautiful. I love that. Find your magic.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah, they're all fucking good.
They're all great. Yeah, next week's fun too.
Yes, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to everything coming up. It's just, like Arielle said, you can't really project too far ahead. So, baby steps at a time.
All righty.
All right. Love you. Thank you so much.
Bye.